Recording this computer. All right. Hi, everyone. I am here. Well, hold on. Backtrack. um, Thanks for watching the Inform Forum on YouTube, which has about, 30 subscribers. I appreciate you guys, and I'm here with Mike Farrell. How do you say your last name, actually?
It is Farrell.
Farrell. Okay. I'm here with Mike Farrell, and I'll let him introduce himself, and he'll tell you what he's doing here on my show.
Well, thanks. Again, my name is Mike Farrell, and this year I'm a candidate in Delaware County for the Court of Common Pleas, the General Trial Court in Delaware County.
Very, very cool. So I guess the first question is, because a lot of people don't know this, and I'm ignorant even myself, what does that exactly have jurisdiction over?
Well, if you think of it in terms of...
Operate, I guess.
I'm sorry?
Or how does it operate in relation to, like, the county politics?
Well, courts, jurisdiction is defined as the cases or controversies that an individual court can hear. Federal courts can only hear questions of federal law or controversies of people of different states over a certain dollar amount. Small claims court, or what we call magisterial district justice court, can only hear smaller claims up to about $12,000. Court of Common Pleas is the workhorse of the court system. It literally can hear anything. If you can't get into a federal court because you don't have diversity of citizenship or a federal question, or even if you do and you choose to, you can file it in the Court of Common Pleas. If you choose, even with a very small, you don't have to go to small claims court, even with a small matter. You can go to the Court of Common Pleas. They call it the Court of General Jurisdiction because it is where everything is welcome. Every case or controversy can go there. The other courts are limited, and you have to sort of meet their criterion in order to get in.
Okay, so you could kind of be handling all types of things, for instance.
Absolutely. The court is broken down, as most counties do. Delaware County breaks its courts into divisions. There's a civil division, a criminal division, family division, orphans court, so that individual judges, there are 20 judges, there'll be about 23 after this election, depending on when we fill the final fifth slot. Those individual judges, one may be assigned only to civil, one may be assigned only to family. They as a board of judges, make up that entire jurisdiction, but each individual judge, they sort of narrow your focus. It ends up being more efficient if you see the same things during
Okay. So in a sense, like, a certain judge usually has one specific area.
Right.
Sort
right.
of.
If you can sit in anything, you're competent to. If they need somebody to do something in criminal, they certainly won't hesitate to pull somebody from family and so forth. But by and large, a judge is assigned by the president judge of the county to a specific division.
That's very interesting. I didn't really know much about that. As someone that's learning about the local level and how important and how much clout that has. And it's interesting that you could potentially be ruling on a number of things that are of national importance or are of local importance or of individual importance. And just because there's a lot of I'd say maybe even highly contentious issues in and around Delaware County that I'm at least aware of, relating to I think it's the George Hill prison, and then there's the Mariner East 2 pipeline.
Those are two of the very well-known controversies, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are plenty of others, let alone like the burning of plastic in Chester. with plastic from even as far as New York. And I mean, this is something that even impacts me at an individual level. So, because I have asthma, so it doesn't really help me. But
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's
and
interesting.
even seemingly insignificant cases. When I was at a big firm downtown, I got assigned to do an insurance coverage case regarding automobile insurance,
Hmm.
and I can sort of see your eyes fluttering in the picture right now, about to fall asleep just hearing that. But that ended up going to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court because
Hmm.
what the issue in that case was whether people were being asked to waive a right they had by statute to a certain type of insurance coverage on their cars. And the question was, did the insurance companies give people enough notice in the waiver that they were giving away this right? It was the most boring, seemingly insignificant case, which is why a junior associate caught the case in the first place at a big firm. But I
Right.
ended up arguing in the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. It was a big deal.
That is a pretty big deal. It's interesting. It's a strange case, seemingly strange. And I'll be honest, I'm not even really sure I understand it. But
Well, just because I brought it up, and not to bore you further, but what it is when you sign up for insurance for your car, you have to fill out a million forms like everything else.
hmm
One of those forms says you have the right to uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage. That's coverage that your insurance company provides when you get into an accident with somebody who doesn't have any or enough insurance, underinsured or uninsured.
right.
And people, to lower their rates, were just saying, I don't want that. But the
Oh, okay.
paper may or may not have explained enough to let people know what rights they were going by. So that the specific wording on the document was being reviewed.
Huh. That-
Did they let you know? Because, and that is so, I know criminal cases tend to get the attention, and environmental cases are very exciting. But one thing about being a judge is you have to pay attention to the stuff in every case, because if somebody doesn't have money to cover their car, can't get to work, I mean,
Yeah.
every case, every controversy, even the seemingly insignificant, even the not very exciting ones, can be important, and you have to treat them all with respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like at least what I'm understanding is you have to be very detail oriented. Um, and see if there's something there that could be brought out, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Right, right.
Which is interesting, and that's just such an insane case to me. It's so interesting to think about. As someone that also has to be detail oriented in her job, so well, in my job, so
Mm.
it's just kind of interesting to think about cases like that. And I mean, yeah, everything does matter, and every little thing does matter, and it's important because like the little things then become a big thing eventually, or something or other.
Right. And to the people who brought the case, the plaintiff, that that's really, I think, what people seem to get away from running for judge. They talk about the big broad strokes, and that's important and necessary. But in the smaller matters, the under 50,000 or under 100,000 case, that's still a lot of money to the person who's involved, who's a defendant or who's a plaintiff. The small, that's hugely important to the person, to the families of both sides. You can't really disrespect any controversy. All matter, and especially to the people in front of you.
Absolutely, because then they say like, oh, okay, this person like treated me really well. They're a really good judge, and
Mhm.
like I'd recommend trying to see like if they can like judge on your case, or I don't know how that works, but like the way you're describing, like you would like approach being a judge
Yeah.
is a good way to approach it, basically. That
Yeah,
I
and
think
I think
can,
it's really the only way to look at it. I
yeah,
mean, when you talk the old phrase your day in court. This is when I walk into a courtroom, or when any other person who's been elected to the bench walks into a courtroom, it's their day. That's their office.
mhm,
But it's the only day, the only time that litigant, whether it's criminal, family, or whatever, they're usually not having the most stress-free day. They're
right,
nervous, they're worried, they're whatever.
mhm,
This is their day in court. However small you or I may feel it is in the grand scheme of things, whether it's deciding the most important point of constitutional law, or just figuring out how a family's going to survive, or figuring out how to deal with a civil suit, whatever it is, it's important to the people there. It's their day.
yeah. Basically, I mean that makes so much sense. Um, I guess so. Now that at least we understand that you wouldn't like rule out serving on any case at all, no matter how big or small or seemingly unimportant. I guess like another question would be like, what I'm trying to phrase this in a way that makes sense. Like, I think sometimes when we elect people to office, they, regardless of its national, statewide, or local, they kind of, I don't want to say become out of touch, but I can't really think of a better word.
No, I absolutely understand.
Um, I guess,
I've actually
like,
run for state senate a couple of times.
okay.
Tim Carney currently sits in the seat I ran for in 2006 and almost won.
Hmm.
And in 2010, I ran again, which was not as very receptive a year for Democrats in 2010. But
Right.
I have sat in rooms where, even as just a candidate, people, lobbyists, try to get you to be on their side. And I think what you're saying about people losing touch happens when an echo chamber sort of forms around a legislator or an elected official, because sometimes, and this is not the way it should be, but sometimes the people with money are the people with access to that office, or the
Yeah.
people who have lobbyists, or the people who are willing to go to the office and speak up, are the ones who, the squeaky wheel tends to get the grease, the old saying goes. And
Yeah.
if you're not speaking, they're not going to hear you.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I'm kind of wondering in regards to like you and your position is like how would you make an effort to like kind of understand the different issues in different areas of Delco that affect said communities in order to kind of like stay in touch with people in that community? Because I think like, and this was something that was said, I think at a meeting that I went to on Saturday, that there's kind of two different sections of Zelco in general. Maybe a
Right.
little bit like three, but generally there's two. There's kind of your like middle to upper class white, well, mainly white area.
Mm.
Then you have your middle to lower class, maybe like white poor, people of color poor, and other minorities poor areas.
Hmm.
And obviously, they're night and day. I live in one of the middle to upper class areas of Delco, um, just because that's where I was born. But um, like I understand the two differences. So I guess like how would you stay in touch with those communities?
I think that's an excellent question, and it's usually a question that only is directed to legislators or people in those offices. But I think the sensitivity you're referring to, taking into consideration the context of a situation, where someone comes from, is important. And I'll tell you, there is a worry. I am worried sometimes when I walk into a courtroom. I'm in a racial group and an economic group, that when I walk into a courtroom, I can express what I want and do it in a way that the court is familiar with.
Hmm.
That's not true of everyone who hasn't had the access to education, who doesn't have the access to representation that I do.
Right.
And in the civil world, you see it. If somebody does, even among quality of attorney, much less having an attorney at all, if you are struggling or are in a part of Delaware County where you don't have access to education, you don't have access to the money that would allow you to get an attorney, when you walk into a courtroom, a good judge has to be sympathetic and know that the very educated, erudite person speaking on the one side of the room is no intrinsically better or worse than the person who's expressing themselves as best they can, but in a different way. As a
Right.
judge, you can't judge one better and one worse just because one comes in with a St. Joe's education and a Villanova law degree and the other doesn't.
Right. You
I
gotta
think
try
in
to have
that
to
way,
look at everything
right?
objectively.
Yeah. I think in that way, and you bring up an interesting point, and I don't think it's being discussed nearly enough. Just because you don't come from a certain area or in a certain economic resource background, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have every bit the same opportunity and access to the courts. I think people always talk about public defenders in criminal cases, how uh, the resources those attorneys get are stretched well beyond the prosecutorial resources. I don't know the specific numbers in Delaware County, but when you're going before a court, who you pick to represent you and whether you're even able to have someone represent you, that matters. It really does. If you have no representation, you're not going to be able to articulate what it is you want or what your defense is or what your claim is nearly as well. And I think as judicial candidates, as judges, it's important to take into account how something is being articulated based on the context, what part of Delaware County they come from, what situation they come from, as you say. I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah, because when I elaborating kind of on what you're saying, the average layperson, even myself, for point of reference, isn't going to know how to talk about any of this jargon. And even on the modest income I make, I'm not going to be able to have a lawyer if I need to go to criminal court. It's just
Yeah.
not something I can afford. Um, Now I don't think I will go to criminal court anytime soon, but
Let's hope not.
I mean, knocking on wood right now.
Uh,
But the point is, yeah, everyone should be treated equally, especially if they don't have representation, which the areas that are not
well, see that,
can't afford it.
not to be corny about it, but you always see those statues of justice with the scales.
Yeah.
If you look, the feature most people don't look at, she's got a blindfold on. You're not supposed to look and see who it is
Hmm.
and deter. Justice is supposed to be blind. Everyone who walks in is supposed to have the same access, the same opportunity to be heard.
Hmm.
If you're not getting that because of where you live or how much money you have, I think it's absolutely a valid thing for judges to take into account.
Yeah. And I guess like one thing I wanted to say, which is an interesting experience that I had recently. Because I was, well, kind of invited to go to the county courthouse in Delco. Um,
Invited by the sheriff, or?
invited by like a colleague,
Oh, okay.
sort of, to go and like be there for someone, almost like in solidarity kind of a thing.
Oh, it's very nice.
Um, and it was interesting because I was there for maybe like 3 or 4 hours um on my day off, and a white person came out from the back room that was not handcuffed. Then 2 or 3 maybe black people came out that all were handcuffed. And I thought that, I mean, I don't really know much about their cases. I couldn't recount them now at all if I tried.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know what I ate for breakfast. I'm kind of that kind of a person. So, but the point is, like, it was really interesting to see that, because when I think of, I mean, Delaware County, it's historically a very racist place. Um, Unfortunately, just like from a historical standpoint of the reason why it was created, and like all of these like gentrification and stuff like that. So
Right.
it was just interesting to see that as a little bit of a, that's not even me like saying a question, it's just me like explaining something that I saw that was kind of stark.
Sure.
And I do remember one little case that had to do with mental health issues.
Okay.
That
There
was
is the mental health court. Was it in mental health court?
um it may have been. I It's so hard for me to know. All I know, I think it was in courtroom number 4,
Okay.
which is probably not helpful at all. But
Well,
it was an interesting case. Just had to do with mental health issues and some type of imbalance. So I guess, as far as like we talked a little bit about like economic issues and things like that,
right.
which is for me like full stop. I'm kind of a social democrat, maybe even a little bit of a socialist, kind of part communist, possibly.
Okay.
But like, so for me, I talk about economics first and other things later. It's kind of how I see the world. But like, there are other issues. So like, as far as like mental health and things, is there something that you might like? Can you kind of talk about how like you might approach something like that in a sense, or like?
Sure. And I think it does dovetail with what we were talking about in terms of economics. Um, People who come into the court system frequently have, especially in family and in criminal division, frequently that's an issue. Can they, if they're a criminal defendant, are they competent to stand trial based upon their mental ability, based upon their ability to understand and appreciate what's going on? Even in family and in civil court, how you perceive what's going on affects your ability to participate in the proceedings. Every time you go into court, rights of yours and rights of other people's are being determined. Do I have the right to remain out of jail? Do I have the right to money to repay me for a tort that's been committed? Whatever it is, that proceeding is something that the participants have to understand. And if they don't, or if they can't, that's definitely something every judge in every division has to be not just sensitive to. I mean, if it takes putting something into a special mental health court, or even short of that, taking into account a lesser deficit, yeah, that's a day. That's every day in a judge's courtroom.
Hmm.
It's the day in a courtroom is not filled with people in perfectly dressed, people in suits and articulating things with Oxford English. The world is what the world is, and part of that is people struggling with mental health issues, and that's part of every day in the courtrooms.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately it's becoming all too widespread,
Yeah,
um, particularly in honestly all areas of Delco.
yeah,
Um, just because there's general abuse and then there's not being able to afford what people need. But that's obviously not an issue under your purview. Exactly.
right.
Because I mean, I'm sure you might be able to rule perhaps on a case where someone wants to sue an insurance company, but
Right.
that's not, while I would love for that to happen.
Someone to sue an insurance, trust me, it happens all the time.
Right. Because these insurance companies are predatory at best. Um, I mean, they operate under a profit. So
Yeah.
I call them death care providers.
Specifically health insurance.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's a I'm not gonna go down that road because I know if I do, I'll get mad and then I'll get screamy, and I don't want to do that. But so I can unfortunately get a little fired up with certain topics.
Sure.
But and now my mind's going down a rabbit hole with other things. Oh my god.
I didn't mean to lead you astray.
No, it's more like my mind is leading me astray to like being angry at certain people that aren't doing certain things, and it's not you at all. Obviously. But trying to think if there's anything else that we could talk about. Well, you know what? As a basic like question, because I mean, I think know the answer. I think I've actually heard the story like twice. But like, why this position? Why law? Why now?
Wow, that's a big question. Why law? I guess goes back to law school itself. Back when the glaciers receded, and I was a young student, I chose law in part with an eye towards going into public life. I was that kid in school who ran for class president, who wanted to be at the table, who always volunteered for committees, who cleaned up, who I was that kid. And I've always felt better about my experience. That's how I enter the world. I I feel better about my experience in the world when I'm participating. So law was always the obvious thing, at least to me.
Mm.
I'm a decent writer, I'm a decent speaker. It's it seemed to mesh both with what it required of me and what I could give to the world to do that. But I will, if you're referring to the story I've told before about what kind of judge and why I want to be a judge,
Yeah.
I've told, that's the story you were looking for?
Yeah.
I've told the story when I was also a young litigator at a big firm in Philadelphia. I wanted desperately, as all young trial lawyers want, to get into the courtroom. And when you were at a big firm, it's very prestigious, but the downside is the cases tend to be worth more than anyone's going to trust to a 25-year-old, which is what 26, I think, which is what I was. So
Hmm.
I volunteered. Again, I'm the kid who volunteers. I volunteered for a case with the ACLU. And I and a couple of other associates at this big firm worked on this case. And the matter was every week for 2 years, this one woman would go get on a bus and go to Graterford Prison to see her son who was incarcerated there. Every week for 2 years, she would stand in front of a male guard who was checking at the door, the security check. And every week for 2 years, she was turned away, not allowed to see her son. And The reason was because of her religious belief, she was unable to reveal her face. She had a veil to anyone who was male, not a member of her family. It was a common thing. And there were tons of female corrections officers. There
Right.
were a million ways they could have accommodated her, but for whatever reason, the people at the prison didn't want to, or I don't know what they thought.
Mm.
So the ACLU, my big firm, and I all got together and filed a suit to help this one. And I found myself at that point, 27 years old, scared out of my mind, standing at 6th and Market in front of a federal judge. I was terrified. But I had prepared, I had researched it to a fairly well. And
Mm.
I was about to give what I've told people would have been the finest opening statement in the history of jurisprudence. It would have changed minds. It would have changed the world. We will never know because I didn't get a chance to give it. And the reason was this judge I was in front of got it. He understood. And before I even got to open my mouth, he called all the attorneys to the bench and he said, listen, it happened to be all men. And he said, listen, gentlemen, whatever else we do today, that woman is going to see her son. Step back. We're going to figure this out. And it's the obviousness of that. When I tell you I was ready to argue the intricacies of so many cases, twists and turns and details,
Mhm.
he cut through it. He got it. And he got to go home that day, and when his kids asked him, what'd you do today, Dad? He got to tell them he did that. And I remember thinking at that moment, I want to do that.
Yeah.
That's who I want to be. And I've told this story, and I always sometimes have I have 15-year-old twins, Connor and Christina, my son and my daughter. They hate it when I do this because at this point in the story, I always point at them and I say, whichever one's in the room,
Mm.
point at them and say, when Connor or Christina asks me at the end of the day, what did you do? I want to be able to say something like, I did that.
Yeah. I mean, because it's the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, but it's also selfish. I mean, there are very few jobs in this world where you can literally every day mean something in someone's life. You can be the most noble person in the world, have the greatest. Being a judge gives you the opportunity to literally every time you deal with anything, you are solving a controversy. Two or more sides are at odds. They couldn't solve it themselves. They've come before you. You get to help every chance every time you walk into a room, you get to do something to make that room or those participants better off. That's fundamentally cool. That's self-servingly cool.
It is pretty cool, and I mean, it's a way to just uplift so many lives, especially in the
Yeah.
case of prison. Which I mean, after the forum the other night, and even just I went to one of CADB's meetings
Mm-hmm.
on Saturday, and just learning about things that I didn't necessarily know about
Yeah.
are just shocking. And I mean, it's having the power to create positive change in people's lives that matters.
Yeah. I mean, the world is imperfect, and CADB is a great group that is trying to grapple with a criminal justice system that, like I think I said at that meeting you're referring to, that there's a quote on the moot court bench in my law school, and it says the law must be stable, but it can't stand still. And I quoted that a couple of times over the course of this campaign because there is nothing that's perfect in this world. That's why we have judges and give them discretion, because a legislature or a governor can't predict everything. You can't have bright letter law or
Right.
black letter law for literally every situation. You need a judge. You need someone with the flexibility and the wisdom in that room to apply not just the law, but common sense to a situation. And I
Right.
think that's what the people at CADB and ultimately everyone in the criminal justice system should want.
Right. Especially with so many like ICE camps around this area. Which is a big issue because places like Comcast and Aramark actually have contracts to have ICE holding facilities in certain areas, which is something a lot of people don't know about.
Hmm.
But like even that is something, and that could be something that you rule on. I don't know exactly where they are in this area, but I think there may be one in Delco somewhere off the top of my head. But don't quote me on that. I'm not sure.
I won't quote you. It's ICE is more a federal issue, but I do remember reading in the paper about judges in the area who were objecting to people being detained or being dragged out of their courtroom because ICE was sitting in there waiting to see people who come in who might be detained, but they couldn't find until they came into a courtroom.
Right.
I know that's an issue that's come up in state court, but by and large, immigration and detention related to immigration, those issues are usually federal.
Right. That makes sense. I guess I brought it up because it was in relation to, I guess, those behind the walls, if you want to call it that, which is how I've been trying to refer to those behind the walls.
Well, I will say this, the fundamental emotion I hear behind what you're saying is something that's related to judges, and it's sort of an empathy. When you take into account not just law and fact and the application of law to fact, you have to take into account that cases are really about people.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't deal with people without having a certain degree of humanity, a certain degree of empathy. So I think that applies universally to ICE and everything else. You can't lose you were talking earlier about losing your perspective, losing touch with different socioeconomic groups in different parts of the county.
Mm-hmm.
I think that at a larger level, you can't lose your humanity in general. That's one of the most precious things you have in any job, but especially when you're a judge and are being asked to use your wisdom to determine people's rights. You have to maintain your humanity.
Yeah, and I think I mean I already see it all too well in certain people that represent Delco, or at least a good swath of it. And it's good to hear that you won't do that, or it doesn't seem like you would.
Well,
You would approach everything and kind of like stay in touch and like look at everything like objectively, and like you said, like justice is blind, and see like, okay, here are the facts relating to this issue. Here are the underlying facts pertaining to these two people or this issue, and
yeah,
this is the most fair ruling that I can make regarding this.
yeah. I hope, and I fully. First of all, I can tell you, my wife and my kids are the best people I know in the world, and I trust, being an Irish family, that they won't be at all shy about telling me if I ever do go astray. They haven't been shy up until now of voicing complaints about anything in the world.
Yeah, usually people of Irish, English, and maybe Scottish descent are not quiet.
Yeah.
Um,
I absolutely love the Irish personality. I don't mean to get off on a non-judicial topic, but
it's cool.
I frequently ask people if they know what Irish diplomacy is. You ever heard of Irish diplomacy?
No.
It's the ability to charmingly tell one to go to hell and convince them they'll enjoy the trip.
I think that's so true, though. Oh man, that's funny.
I like the southern version of it too, where you can be told "bless your heart," and that's not
Mhm.
at all what they really are saying.
Oh, so not. And I have this little tiny group of people that I tend to have chats with, and they're from all over the country. I've known them for about, I don't know, 4 years now.
Right.
There's someone from Kentucky, Texas, like Seattle, California,
Right.
Florida, Alabama, and a few places. And all of these people are nominally on the far left, if you want to call it the far left. I call that the center left, like the actual left. But that's a whole nother topic. But it's just, I guess my point is, and I swear I had a point. My point is that every area has their own quote unquote "fuck you" or "go fuck yourself" type of thing.
A
So
way of expressing dissatisfaction with someone's presence.
yes, for lack of a better way of saying it, a better way of saying it.
More words, less meaning, I suppose. Yours is very direct.
Yeah, but I'm not a direct person, not at all. That's not my style.
I unfortunately I have to admit I am more. The 17th century court of Louis France way of doing battle, I don't get as well. I understand when litigation, I know that the attorney on the other side is directly against my interest. We can disagree without being disagreeable. I get direct battles. I suffer more when passive aggressive or innuendos fly right by me.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't really do. I guess for me, I'm very bad at jokes. I do not get jokes. If someone tells me a joke at, I don't know, 9 a.m. in the morning or 9:30, I will not get it until about 4 in the afternoon.
Well, so long as you get
So,
it.
like for me, like it's important that people are direct with me, because if they're not, it's kind of why I have such a good BS meter. Um, but the good news is I don't seem to be getting any of that from you.
Well, I'm pleased that's true. I There's the old thing you say to kids, honesty is the best policy because you have to have a good memory otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Keep a track of all the lies.
Mm-hmm. You really do, and it's not worth it, especially being, well, in the position that you hopefully will soon be in Delco. So
I hope so too. Thank you.
yeah, and I guess let me ask, what so what can we do, or not we, but well, maybe, but like, how can we help you get elected, or what is it that you need help with now?
Well, what you're doing at this moment, getting the word out about the election and hopefully letting people know who's running, I think is educating voters is always the most important part of any election. I suppose with a certain amount of hubris believe I'm qualified and that if people learn about me they'll agree. Um right now we're in the last 2 weeks before the primary, so it's all about getting to the polls, getting people who are going to vote to the polls, and I guess telling people at the polls, vote for the person who you believe is the best candidate. If you believe I'm the best candidate, tell them to vote for me. That would be the best thing.
That's easy
It's
enough.
simplistic as that.
Yeah, that's easy enough. And Lord knows the next election is going to be a fun one. So,
You're referring to 2019 or 2020?
2020 mostly. But well,
Much as I'm very interested in 2019, 2020 is that's going to set a lot of things in stone that are going to change the world for good or for ill, depending on how it works out.
depending on how it works out. But, I mean, if anything, I guess I don't want to keep you much longer. I'm not sure what time it is. Yeah, we should probably cut this off shortly. Not to, say you
I
gotta go, but because
I
clearly I'm just
understand.
sitting down and doing nothing but talking to you, which is awesome. I guess so. For those of you watching, I just wanted to say that the primary is May 21st.
Yes.
So if you, after watching this video, believe that Mike Farrell should be, and remind me what it is that you're running for again. It's the court of,
Judge of the Court of Common Pleas.
yes.
I am at A5. I'm the second person on the Democratic ballot. I'm only on the Democratic ballot. There's a lot of controversy about this, but judges are allowed to cross file. In other words, Republicans are allowed to file as Democrats, Democrats as Republicans. There are 10 other people running for judge on, if you take both parties into account. I am the 11th, and I am the only one who is only running on one party. I am only running as a Democrat.
Right.
For me, it was a question of conscience. I couldn't put my name. I think I know Republicans who are fantastic, who are great people, and I don't mean to disparage them or any person. I can't put my name on a banner of a group led by that guy. I can't do it. As a person who's got a disability, who advocates for people with disabilities, I can't say to the people who support me, yeah, I'm going to run under the party led by the guy who makes fun of people with disabilities. I just can't do it.
I understand. I mean, it's hard for me because on some, I am the only leftist in my family.
Yeah.
Um, my mom actually is a log cabin Republican and voted for Trump and lost her job because of Trump, but still supports Trump.
Wow.
So, and my entire extended family are the stereotypical Fox viewers. Um,
Right.
so, but it's interesting to talk to them when they get down to the granular issues because we kind of agree on some issues.
Well,
So,
that's
like, I definitely, I guess, respect that decision. I think it's hard though because in order to move forward, we kind of have to move back and look at where we got here or how we got here.
You're right.
And
And I think your family is an example of a lot of people in this time. And I'm glad to hear you've started at least to find common ground. Because the ability to, you're never going to agree with everybody about anything. Again,
no,
wisdom from an Irish family.
right,
But it's the ability to communicate with one another peacefully or at least civilly and to find common ground where you can. I think that's the most important thing. And
absolutely.
ultimately, that's what'll keep us going as a country.
Yeah, yeah. That and getting big money out of politics by a constitutional amendment. But
You
I
do
don't know.
have an advocacy side. You sure you don't want to be a lawyer?
We'll see one day. We'll see. Kind of in a weird academic predicament right now, but don't really want to talk about it live. Um,
Well, if you decide to do it, I'd be more than happy to see you in front of me someday.
yeah, I really wouldn't be opposed because, I don't have ambitions for higher office. But um that's a whole nother basket of eggs. Um, but anyway, I want to say thank you for coming on my tiny little YouTube show, and I wish
I
you,
appreciate the opportunity.
yeah, it was cool, and I guess I wish you the best of luck on May 21st.
Thank you so much.
So, all right, thanks guys for watching. And I guess click the subscribe button if you haven't subscribed. It's a fun show. We do it not often at all. But you know how I do this. I do interviews, and feel free to subscribe. And that's about it. So, thanks, guys.